It's good to see you folks. I do look forward to these moments. We've been talking in the Sunday school recently and on Thursdays that, things like the fellowship of the believers and in connecting, they're survival tactics. This matters. We had really, I think, one of the best Sunday schools we've had in a long time, as people were just sharing deeply of what they saw in the Word and what they had been through personally and on the topic of hope. We need each other. All eyes this way for a second. We need each other. I need to be here this morning. You need to be here in many regards this morning. We need the presence of the Lord that is available in and through the church. Now, yes, you can meet with Jesus at home in the prayer closet. He'll hang out with you and ride shotgun in the car. That's the one place you don't want to give Jesus the wheel, by the way. But there's something about this. There's something about the small group setting. There's something about the 8 a.m. time of prayer. There's something about all these means that we have to gather and to connect that it's irreplaceable and it's precious. And in so many ways, the longer I live, and I'm still relatively young, I'm kind of at that weird in-between age, the more I just long for what heaven's going to be like. And just that unbroken fellowship of people who know and who love Jesus, who have experienced so much, but who are so connected one with another, and of course with Him. But I have to digress. Today is Pentecost Sunday, as the bulletin says, and as the image behind me, if the look at that, technology works. Today's Pentecost Sunday, and for those who may not know, though I touched upon this last week, Pentecost was the day on which the Church of Jesus Christ was launched into the fullness of ministry and mission almost 2,000 years ago now. Having been empowered by the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts chapter 2, we will get to that text in a few moments. I wouldn't turn there quite yet. But this is a moment in biblical history that's worthy of a lot of reflection, in discussion, in study, and asking some tough questions. One of the things I love about God's Word is it forces us to ask some tough questions about life and living in any generation, but in the generation in which we find ourselves. And though we're certainly going to build to the happenings of Acts chapter 2 in the minutes ahead, I want to begin actually in the Gospel of Luke. So please turn to the Gospel of Luke chapter 4. Luke 4. FYI, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts were both penned by the same person. Anybody want to venture a guess as to who wrote the book of Luke and the book of Luke? Yeah. Traveling companion of the Apostle Paul, evangelist, faithful disciple, a learned man as well. Also a Gentile, not a Jew. Which is interesting because I believe word for word he wrote more of the New Testament being a non-Jew than any other author, including the Apostle Paul. Paul has more books, but word for word, Luke has more actual writing. We're going to look at elements of both books today, but I want to begin in Luke chapter 4. And again, we're going to kind of build to the theme of Pentecost, but I want to lead you through a train of thought, if you will. Luke chapter 4, we're going to pick it up in verse 16. I'm not reading from the NIV for this one text. I'm going to read from the English Standard Version, the ESV. I like how it flows a little bit better. So if you're using a different translation, that's okay. I would recommend looking at multiple translations in your studies. Get familiar with different ones. Luke chapter 4, starting in verse 16, just FYI, this is following his baptism, and it's following his time in the wilderness with the temptations of the enemy. And it says in verse 16 of chapter 4, and he, speaking of Jesus, came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. So he's going to his hometown in a lot of respects. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and he found the place where it was written. Now this comes from Isaiah chapter 61, if you want to look in your own time, but I'm going to read from what it says, starting at verse 18. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Verse 20 of Luke 4, and he, speaking of Jesus, rolled up the scroll, and he gave it back to the attendant, and he sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And we'll conclude with verse 21. And he began to say to them, today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. That is a profound text for a number of reasons. Number one, what we see is that Jesus is actively, deliberately, and publicly announcing the fulfillment of a text, a prophetic text from Isaiah that was almost or over 700 years old. You know, we have very little concept of time because we're still a new nation. You know, if you go out to the West Coast, and I've been there with my wife Misty, and you drive into a town and it says, you know, Kent, Washington, that's where her family lives, established 1937. When Misty came here, welcome to Barrie, established in, help the pastor out, any elders know, 1774, and she would always say, wow, that's so much older. A whole 150, 200 years. This text had been around for 700 years, over 3 times, if my math is correct, or about 3 times the duration of our entire country. The people of God had been waiting for the fulfillment of this text, as someone would come forth who would fulfill what Isaiah foresaw. And Jesus, on that one day, he happened to be in synagogue, as was his custom. It fell to him to read the text. He searched for this text. He unrolled the scroll. He was deliberate. He reads it. This profound text of Isaiah 61. And then he has the audacity in some regards to say today, all of your expectations for centuries and your fathers and your grandfathers and long before them, today it's fulfilled. Just think of the significance of that moment. Number 2, the reaction or the response of the crowd is interesting because as he continues on to talk, eventually it says the following in verse 28. Luke 4:28, you can look there if you desire. All the people in the synagogue were furious at some of the subsequent things that he had to say. They got up. They drove him out of the town. The place where he was raised, by the way, these weren't strangers. This would be like getting pitchforks and torches and chasing Hefe out of Dodge. Not a bad idea. For those who don't know, Hefe is one of my best friends. If you're watching online and they often throw Hefe under the bus, now you know a little bit why. They took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. Oh, they were livid. And then verse 30 is interesting, but he just walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Just something supernatural must have taken place where this guy was about to be tossed, and he just walks through the crowd because it was not yet the appointed time for his life to be given. But what I want to focus on today is the substance of what he had to say. What are the foundational points of this text, Luke chapter 4, 18 and 19? If you were to write a sermon on what Jesus said, what would it be? Well, it's this. 5 points. He had come to proclaim or to preach good news to the poor. Number 2, he had come to proclaim liberty or release to those who were captives. Number 3, he had come to proclaim recovery of sight to the blind. Number 4, he came to set at liberty those who were oppressed. And ultimately, verse 5, he came to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. A rough paraphrase is the time of God's grace and mercy has come. And I'm drawn to these 5 points because if you're looking for a vision or a mission statement of Jesus Christ, this is it. If you go online to any corporation, organization, large or small, almost every website will have some kind of a vision or a mission statement. We can go to coca-cola.org, they will have a vision statement. We can go to McKesson, where Jeffrey works, and they will have a vision statement. We can go to Fresenius, we can go to Verizon, we can go to Mission E4, we can go to Allegro. All these companies, they will all have a vision or a mission statement. Well, Luke chapter 4 is a text in which Jesus announces his mission. This is what I have come to do. I have come to do these things. And again, if you continue to read in the Gospels, you will see him preaching good news to the poor. You will see him bringing release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind. You will see him proclaiming that a new era of God's grace and mercy has come, and it's available to anybody who wants it. And we could spend our time this morning looking at each of these. That would be a fantastic 5-point sermon or a 5-week series, maybe in the weeks ahead. But I want to look at a text that we often overlook, and it sets the stage, or it's the foundation for the entire thing. And it's verse 18. Jesus speaking, fulfilling a prophetic text, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to do everything else." Everything that comes after, proclaiming good news to the poor, proclaiming liberty to the captives, giving recovery of sight to the blind, setting at liberty those who are oppressed, proclaiming the year of God's grace and mercy, all of that is founded upon a reality that we can blow by in the reading. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has commissioned me, he has authorized me to do the following work. You know, when you study the life of Jesus Christ, we can get so caught up in his teaching and his work that we can forget that all of that teaching and work was made possible through the person and through the power of the Spirit of God. Now, could Jesus on his own have done it as God the Son? Absolutely. But so as to set an example for us, he humbled himself. He became completely obedient to the will of the Father, and he became completely reliant upon the power of the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, speaking of divine authorization, because he has anointed me, speaking of enablement. Everything that Jesus did was empowered and authorized by the Spirit of the living God. So let's play a little game. And I'm going to give you the answer ahead of time. You ready? When I ask a question, the answer is by the Spirit. Everybody repeat that after me. By the Spirit. How did Jesus cast out demons? How did Jesus cleanse the lepers? How did Jesus raise the dead on 3 separate occasions, not including himself? How did he give sight to the blind man? Oh, don't go weak on me, gang, with some power now. How did he teach with authority to the multitudes? How did he feed the multitudes, turn a boy's lunch into a meal that would feed thousands? How did he do it? How did he calm raging storms? How did he walk on water? How many of you have a favorite miracle of Jesus Christ? And I have a few. How did he perform that miracle? By the Spirit. We have to recognize this facet of his coming and, fancy word, his incarnation, God becoming flesh. If we're truly to understand his life and ministry, everything that he did was founded upon the empowerment and the authorization of the Holy Spirit. I'm going to skip ahead because what you see when you read through the book of Luke and beyond is that following his baptism, time of testing, and this announcement, he would really begin to be launched into the fullness of ministry, and that's when the miracles and the teaching really began. But I want to advance the story, and I want to change gears because it would be easy for you to say, "Wow, Pastor, good sermon, very interesting. Thank you very much for that." But there's another degree of significance when you realize that when you turn into the book of Acts, the same pattern stands. In other words, what was true for Jesus Christ in his life and ministry was also true for the early church. We can get so caught up in the signs and the wonders of the early church, and there are many. I'll give you a few. Peter heals a lame man. The apostles perform many signs and wonders according to Acts 5. In Acts 5, Peter's shadow was known to bring healing to people. In Acts 9, there's a cripple who was healed. Acts 14, Paul casts out demons. Acts 16, Paul raises the dead. And beyond, and on it goes. Both clergy and laity alike are used to do the work of God, very similar to the ministry of Jesus Christ. But it's easy for us to forget that these things were accomplished, again, by the Spirit. We can get so caught up in the authority that was evident in the apostles' words and beyond that we forget how it was done. We look at Peter preaching one sermon and 3,000 come to Jesus Christ, but we can forget that that was all accomplished through the power of the Spirit of God who had just come upon him. We can look at later figures like Stephen and Philip, and we can say, wow, they were used to preach the gospel. They were used to turn entire cities upside down for Jesus Christ. And we can forget how they did it. What's the answer again? By the Spirit. Acts chapter 1, Jesus promised, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, and in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And if you look at that one verse, it provides really a complete overview of the whole book. Because once the Spirit of God came upon the believers, Jerusalem was transformed. Things began to happen. Thousands were swept into the kingdom. And then in time, it spills over into the broader territory of Judea and Samaria. And ultimately, as the book of Acts ends, we see the Apostle Paul preaching the gospel by the Spirit in Rome, in their mind, to the ends of the earth. And in a lot of respects, the book never really ends because we continue on that work that was started so long ago. Acts chapter 2, I want you to see this with your own eyes. This pattern, this principle of people being reliant upon the power of the Spirit of God to do the work and to preach the gospel. Acts chapter 2, starting at verse 1, says, when the day of Pentecost came, and again, keep in mind, this is 50 days after the resurrection. Just a quick timeline. Resurrection happens. For 40 days, Jesus is on earth teaching. He's spending time with his closest followers. He ascends. For 10 days, the church prays. They're together. They're in this thing, as we talked about last week. They were in it together, expecting, anticipating, obeying, and beyond. And finally, Pentecost comes, and it says that they were all together in one place. I want you to use your imagination. What it was like to be there this day. Suddenly, a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. Can you imagine what would happen if that took place right now? Spirit of God just blows through that top cupola and begins to move in this place in a profound way. And they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest where? On each of them. The original text, it's emphatic there. Each one that was present. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now, verse 5 will continue. Now, there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. Because, again, at Pentecost, the city would have been teeming with Jews who were there to perform religious duties and beyond. When they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment, because each one heard their own language being spoken. Utterly amazed, they asked, hold on a second, aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears them in our native language? And it gives a laundry list: Parthians, Medes, and Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, parts of Libya near Cyrene, visitors all the way from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues. Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, what does this mean? Let's use our imagination. Spirit of God fills this place powerfully. There's this miraculous work that begins to take place. And all of a sudden, people who are driving by are saying, hey, hold on a second, what's going on over there? Corey stops the lawnmower, which he's always driving by at 10:30. Hey, what in the world is going on? Herb on his bike stops. What in the world? All of a sudden, there's a crowd that's starting to form. Southbury, the people from across the street, the people at Yummy Gardens, they come over. What in the world is going on? They have no idea. And of course, verse 13, there's always going to be that group who says, they're just drunk. They had too much wine. But look at what it says in verse 14. Then Peter, we often miss the next phrase. Peter stood up with the 11. Peter was the spokesman, but he wasn't the only one there serving as a witness to the things of God. Peter was the voice, but the body was in operation. They rise up together. Peter begins to speak. He raises his voice, no microphone, by the way, old-fashioned, and he addresses the crowd. Now, we're going to skip the body of his message because it's a little bit lengthy, and it's very deep. But I want to look at verse 41, all the way down. Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. Now again, if 3,000 were saved, that means that there were people who were not. The people who initially mocked, they might have continued to mock. As Peter was preaching, people might have bled away from the crowd and just move on. Oh, they're crazy. Those holy rollers, they're gone. They're out there. But there was enough people in that crowd who, when they heard the word of the Lord being delivered by Peter through the Spirit, again, that's the key, they were cut to the heart. And they began to say, Peter, what do we have to do to be saved? In other words, if all the things that you're saying are true about righteousness and judgment and beyond, how do we respond to this? And Peter brilliantly answers and simply answers, repent and believe. We look at this event, and we can easily say, wow, what a significant moment in church history. What a wonderful event took place. But Pastor, what does this have to do with me in 2019, in a culture so different, so far removed from ancient Jerusalem and beyond? Well, very simply, if Jesus was reliant upon the power of the Spirit of God to perform the mission that was given him, and if the early church was reliant upon the Spirit's empowerment to fulfill the continuation of Jesus Christ's mission in so many regards, it begs the question, and here it is, to what degree are we reliant upon that same power? Not in confession, but in reality. I can take you to assembliesofgod.org. I can show you the 16 fundamental truths, and I can show you where it says that we as a fellowship are dependent upon the power of the Spirit of God and the outworking of the gospel. But that's a confession. That's a statement. I wonder how many of us live according to that. And I'm talking to myself in so many regards. To what degree are we embracing the pattern that is evident in both the ministry of Jesus found in the Gospels and in the ministry of the early church as recorded in the book of Acts? Jesus was dependent and reliant. He did great works and preached the gospel. The early church had a huge mission, monumental continuation of the mission, but they were reliant and dependent upon the Spirit of God to execute it. To what degree in 2019 is the modern church? Now, when you think about this, we have every earthly advantage over the early church. We have greater funds. We have books on church growth, penned by the experts, by the way. We have the benefits of media and technology. I bet Peter could have used a microphone and a sound system that first day. We have the internet. Can you imagine the logistics of 3,000 people getting saved? How do you have church the next week? Where do you meet? Who's leading the small groups? Who's bringing forth all the communication? Who's printing the bulletins? With the right date, by the way. We're going to continue to get that date right. We have the complete written Word of God. They did not at that point. We have 2,000 years of church history, but do we have their power? Do we have an abiding reliance upon the Spirit of God to transform us, to empower us, to work in and through us, to come upon us, so that when we preach the gospel, share our faith, live our lives, that it's not just us talking, but it's the Lord flowing through us in such a way where it has a transformative impact? Now again, not every person you're going to speak to and reach, even as you are empowered, is necessarily going to come to that place of faith. There were people who walked away from Jesus. There were people who walked away from the apostles. There will be people who walk away from you and from me. But how many more could we impact if we at the individual level wake up daily and say, Lord, I want you to use me, and I seek your empowerment to be used. God, I can't do this thing on my own. I can't preach the gospel on my own. I can't live the life that you are calling me to lead on my own. I need something more, and I'm praying that you would be glorified in my weaknesses, because it's in my weakness that you show forth your strength. If I have to sit through one more conference on how to grow a church, I might have to just change fellowships. But wherever I go, that's going to be the case. You want to know how we're going to advance the kingdom of Jesus Christ? It's when each of us as individuals get serious with our walk with the Lord, fully reliant upon Him, that we will see what we want to see. Hear me clearly when I say this. Corporate breakthrough is always founded on individual breakthrough. If you have 100 people and they're all dysfunctional and none of them are seeking the Lord, there's only so much they're going to be able to accomplish. But if each one is taking the time to seek the Lord, to worship, to grow in their faith, to connect with one another, to be used of the Lord to seek His power, then that will be a small army who is capable of great and mighty things that, before you launch into ministry, you couldn't even imagine could be accomplished in and through you. Don't you want to be an elder one day? I try not to use the word old. Don't you want to be an elder one day and look back and just marvel, Lord, I can't believe that you use someone like me to do so much. Not that it's about preaching to multitudes, but you can have an impact wherever you are. You can be used to preach the gospel anywhere. If you have a job, you have a missions field. If you don't have a job, you have a missions field. If you're retired, Lord bless the retired saints in our body, you have a missions field. But are you seeking the empowerment by which you can have an impact in that field? Because Jesus on day one didn't tell the church, go get to work. He told them, you wait. Don't even try to take on this task until you receive power. I'm not going to tell you to do that per se, because the work has to go on. But in the midst of it, maybe before you even attempt it next, that you would seek the Lord, seek hard after Him, call out to Him. Lord, I want you to use me, but there's more that you have to offer through me than I can offer in my own. I have to wonder if the word to our generation of the church is the following, and this comes from an Old Testament book. It's not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. Let me give you the Pastor James paraphrase, the PJP. You will only fulfill the mission that I have given to you if you rely upon the power which I am happy to supply. To what degree do you believe and do you trust that God actually wants to give you that kind of power? That He wants to use you, that He could use someone like you to lay hands on somebody who is sick and to pray the prayer of faith and to see that person made well. To be the kind of person that can encounter a troubled person, discern that there's a demonic situation that's really behind it. There are some things a pill's not going to fix, gang. It could just be a good old-fashioned demon. But it takes that knowledge, that discernment, that insight, in that power to cast that thing out. You say, that sounds ridiculous, Pastor. You read the Gospels. You tell me how often Jesus dealt with these kinds of things. A people of faith, a people of trust. This is the direction we're going to have to move in more and more and more. And I end with this as I'm moving to a close. On this Pentecost Sunday, where we remember that moment where the early church was empowered for service, maybe we should set our hearts on the Lord and humble ourselves in His presence and commit afresh and anew to His work. But for today's message, rely more and more and more on the power that is available in and through Him in the performance of that duty. I want to be the kind of person, this is just me speaking, that takes the Lord at his word. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witness. Collectively, witnesses. First in Barrie, then in Worcester County, then in the United States, and then unto the world. Last couple weeks have been tough, challenging words. What kind of people do we want to be? I can't answer that for you. In some ways, I have the easiest job. I point. For the last 6 months to a year, the Lord has been pointing through this servant. Go deeper to prepare yourself for what's to come. My people expect too little of me, of themselves, and of what I can do in and through them. A couple of weeks ago, what exactly are you convinced of? What convictions do you live by? What are the anchor points for you that are immovable and unchanging? And today, what are you relying on to carry out the mission that you've been given? And I'm going to personalize it not to us, but to you and to me. What are you relying on? Your own wisdom, your own capacity, your own eloquence, your own goodness? No. We need something so much more. And as I said earlier, he's more than happy to supply, but he's not going to give himself away to a people who don't really want to be used. So I leave you with that. To what degree do you want to be the kind of person that can be used, that will expect, that will anticipate, that will obey, that will submit? I'm quoting all of last week's sermon because they tie together. Because he's never going to give his power to this degree to people who just want to play games. It's too precious. But if we get on board, I mean this as I close, sky's the limit. I'm looking at a church that can only hold about 100. If the Lord moved in this place, 3,000 got saved tomorrow, oh, it's a whole different game. But to what degree are we that kind of people? Father, we come before you and we humble ourselves in your mighty presence. And Lord, as we open this time, regardless of my own personal desires and the dreams and the ambitions that I have, so personal, Lord, I want you more. I want to be the kind of person that you can use, God, in ever-increasing degrees, the kind of person, God, that you will empower because my heart is ultimately to carry out your desires in this earth. Let us be that kind of people, Lord, the kind of people who will lay everything aside or put everything in its proper place, but our ultimate desire is you. That we would be a people who are in sync with the heart of Jesus, that we exist to seek and to save those who were lost, to make disciples. Lord, help us to major on the majors in every way and grant us your power. We can't do it on our own. We don't even want to try. Lord, even now, stir in this place. Begin a stirring in individual families, God. As we sang earlier, Lord, we're desperate for every word that you say. We're tired of our old ways, God. Bring the Church of North America to a point that we are tired of doing things our way. We want to see more. We hunger and we thirst for you. I pray for the young ones downstairs. God, as they hear a similar Pentecost message, that you would fill and empower them in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. Stir in their young lives. Use them, God, to impact families and communities. But let us play a role as well. Lord, as we go our separate ways, let this word burrow deep into our hearts. May it haunt us in a good way. Let these questions that have been raised remain in our hearts and in our minds. And we look for the testimony, God, of what you can and will do in and through those who look to you. And Lord, if our desires are elsewhere, change them. Change them. We ask you, God, for your ongoing favor and blessing in the name of Jesus Christ. And everyone says amen.